I have a confession to make. Guys, I'm not a 90s kid. Yeah, that's right, you heard me. I am a 20-year-old fetus. I was in elementary school when the Wii, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3 released. I was in middle school when Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton ran against each other in 2016. And I was only in high school when TikTok started getting popular. Sorry, millennials. I thought sagging was weird. I guess I just can't stand among all of you. Wait, hold the fuck up. Only 90s kids will remember I remember all of this shit. That's a DS. That's not even from the 90s. Okay, even though I didn't grow up as a 90s kid, I still have a lot of fond memories regarding 90s stuff. You guys do realize that a lot of these shows, movies, video games, toy lines, and even edibles from that decade were still huge in the 2000s, right? This stuff didn't just go away after 1999. My generation also had internet before Viacom sued YouTube and piracy was easily obtainable. I remember watching the entire Disney Renaissance on a barely breathing HP computer with a chonky monitor. And I have older siblings. They told me what Ecto Cooler was. I didn't drink it, but they told me what it was! Okay, fine. I'll quit living in other people's past and talk about my own age. I was born in the wrong generation! And to be fair, I don't really blame people from the 90s for not watching a lot of these more late 2000s animated shows, as it wasn't exactly the best era for cartoon fans. 2006 to 2009 was considered a dark age for Western television animation. Nickelodeon started ending many of their cartoons and constantly producing new episodes of SpongeBob SquarePants when it was originally supposed to end with the first movie, as well as more episodes of The Fairly OddParents, which resulted in both shows having an infamous decline in quality. Many of their other animated properties that they were putting out at the time received negative reception from critics, and their iconic animated Splat logo was changed drastically, literally for the sake of making it look more professional on a business card. Disney Channel mostly stuck to airing live-action sitcoms rather than producing cartoons, despite it being the channel from a company that dedicates itself to animation. By the end of the 2000s, Disney decided to replace one of their satellite channels, Toon Disney, a channel that was essentially an archive for nothing but Disney animation, with a replacement titled Disney XD, a channel that aired both animated and mostly live-action content. Cartoon Network's former president, Jim Samples, the man who picked up some of the channel's most iconic shows and started his career during the same year Adult Swim was founded, had resigned from presidency after the Aqua Team Hunger Force's promotional signs were mistaken to be bomb threats, which caused the 2007 Boston Moonlight panic. After he left, he was replaced by businessman Stuart Snyder, who was likely the man that was responsible for allowing the infamous Cartoon Network Reel Block, which produced live-action content for a channel dedicated specifically for airing nothing but animation, even more so than Disney Channel. He was also likely responsible for the temporary end of the famous anime dub block Toonami. Because of these sudden changes and the decline in quality, many fans and millennials had moved away from watching cartoons, either because of distaste and outrage by these new decisions, or because they thought they were getting too old to enjoy cartoons. Believe it or not, however, a lot of Nickelodeon and Disney's live-action sitcoms weren't doing that bad in ratings. iCarly was a hit with teenagers and was reaching millions when it aired, beating several other broadcasts. Other sitcoms from both Nickelodeon and Disney Channel were succeeding financially as well, not just with children, but even older audiences. Many of the child actors in these shows grew up to become extremely successful musicians that are still doing work to this day. The popularity of these shows were hits with teenagers, likely because of the fact that they were actually the primary demographic. Despite these shows being on networks typically known for producing safe child-friendly content, many of them did have mild language and dealt with subjects that weren't entirely kid-friendly. But even with all of this going around, the Cartoon Network Reel program wasn't doing that well. Audiences were likely confused as to why airings of live-action shows were on a channel that's literally called Cartoon Network, and fans were absolutely outraged at the sudden change, especially after many of the shows they grew up with were also cancelled during the beginning of Snyder's presidency. Outside of movies, video games, and anime, many people believe that this era was the death of American animation. Tons of YouTubers who grew up in the 90s and early 2000s expressed sadness and nostalgia from their early childhood memories of all three of these channels. Although not every cartoon during this era was hated, Phineas and Ferb was a major success, and it may have been the sole series that kept audiences watching the medium, but a lot of other shows that released around its time weren't doing that well financially. Believe it or not, the show Chowder actually lasted a pretty short run due to low ratings, and the creator feeling overwhelmed from working on the series. For a long time, it was considered an underrated gem by the animation community. Not even adult cartoons from this era were very effective. South Park was still running smoothly, but The Simpsons had been on a long decline in quality during this time, and Family Guy was on the verge of a decline as well. A lot of the original adult cartoons that came out during these years aren't fondly remembered either. All hope seemed lost for cartoon fans, however there was one series that may have saved the medium from continuous mediocrity. In 2007, Nickelodeon launched a mini-series of pilot episodes that were pitches for a potential upcoming Nicktoon. Sort of like how in the 90s they had the Oh Yeah Cartoons block do the same exact thing, with Fairly Odd Parents and My Life as a Teenage Robot having one against the other pitches on display. This block was called Random Cartoons. I've seen pretty much all of the pitches on this block, and though many of them exist, there's a couple of pretty good ones, like Adventure Time. Yup, that's right, Adventure Time, the world-renowned, award-winning piece of artwork, was being pitched to the Orange Splat. And what did Nickelodeon pick instead? Fanboy and Chum Chum. Oh, wait a minute, that's right, a lot of people in my generation actually like this show now. I don't. And back then, people weren't exactly gushing for it either. The animation's nice though, and the creator did end up making glitch text, which a lot of people seem to enjoy. Whereas Adventure Time got placed on Cartoon Network instead in 2010, and is considered the savior of this dark age that I've been talking about. Clearly, Nickelodeon made a major mistake like they previously did when they also rejected Phineas and Ferb, as the show gained an immensely massive cult following. So, what made it so attractive? Let's discuss the roots. I'll be discussing the first season of this series in this video, since the show is very long and evolved heavily over time. Adventure Time's pilot is weird. In the best freaking way possible. Firstly, I gotta say, Pendleton Ward, the creator of the series, who animated this pilot almost entirely on his own, clearly has a massive respect for animation, and you can totally recognize that in his work. I remember hearing an interview from the guy saying that as a child, whenever he got in trouble, his parents punished him by not letting him watch cartoons, and to loop around that issue, he'd have his friend on the phone put his mic against their television speaker just so he could listen to The Simpsons. I love this pilot's art direction so much. I know that some people don't like the quote-unquote Cal art style, which is a term that I try to avoid now since it was coined by the infamous John Kay, and also just because it didn't originate from Cal Art specifically, and I feel like so many people will call literally any Western television animated show's character design artwork the Cal Art style, even if it's still stylistically different. I will admit that I am kind of tired of every cartoon having the same bean-chic protagonist, but come on, these two shows are clearly stylistically different in every other way. Also, a lot of the people who make this critique watch anime, which is more detailed and I appreciate that a lot more, but they do a very similar thing where they recycle the same techniques. Cartoons also rely on fluidity, so you kind of do have to make them really simple looking. Anyway, Noodle Arms. At the time, this style of artwork wasn't mainstream and was more unique compared to other cartoons airing during its run. It feels very alive and stretchy, yet so simple, but also passes the silhouette procedure with hats and shape theory checking the mark. On top of that, though, the overall humor is just surreal and bizarre in such a well-balanced and ridiculously funny execution. Apparently when this pilot was released, it was uploaded online and became an internet sensation. Which isn't surprising. This feels like something that would have made it big back in the earlier years of YouTube and Newgrounds if everything hadn't been made in Adobe Flash, which is what I think made it stand out in front of other cartoons too. You know how The Simpsons became a phenomenon because of its more realistic dialogue and that it was easy for the general audience to relate to? I feel like that was the same case here with Adventure Time, only more relatable and fascinating towards millennials who grew up in early to late grade school during early YouTube. I know this because I grew up with millennial siblings, and even they liked the show when they were in middle school to high school during the show's earlier seasons, and as a kid, I loved it too. Why the fuck did Nickelodeon not pick this up? They rejected it twice, by the way, not just once, and it's still unexplained as to why. My assumption would be that the series was probably a little too weird for them, I guess, and maybe they saw teens enjoying it and saw younger kids as a demographic to prioritize. Even though, again, they took the risk of giving their sitcoms more mild language. I really wish people viewed animation as an art and took more risks. I heard Nickelodeon also rejected Phineas and Ferb partly because the creator worked on Family Guy, even though he worked on SpongeBob SquarePants too. Apparently that's also why they decided to make the show more lighthearted and very family-friendly. The guys at Disney, though, were fans of Family Guy, so they let P&F have a pass. But I feel like if Adventure Time had been picked up by Nickelodeon, things wouldn't be nearly the same. Nickelodeon would have either cancelled the show by quickly dumping it onto Nicktoons Network if they weren't immediately as successful as SpongeBob SquarePants, restrict certain aspects of the show entirely for dumb censorship purposes, or it would have been a big success and Nick would be milking it dry to this day. Cartoon Network, on the other hand, isn't Nickelodeon. 90% of the time, they let their shows have a proper series finale, and during this period, Cartoon Network was insanely experimental, and they had actually allowed their shows to have way more creative control. Okay, enough ranting. Let me actually get into the show itself. Right off the bat, I fucking love the intro. You see all these characters in an expansive, interesting world. You see all these bright, beautiful colors and backgrounds meshing together so vibrantly. It's like my eyes are having an orgasm. And that song, it's so simple but undoubtedly charming. Also, you can subtly hear Derek Drymon, the creative director, accidentally leaving the audio of his keyboard typing in the first few seconds of it. No, seriously, they kept that in. Almost all 283 episodes, and it's still there. Now let's get to these characters. First, there's Finn, a soon-to-be teenage boy with childlike enthusiasm and an absolute love for adventure, as the show clearly implies. I know that I say a lot about a lot of child characters, but in this case, Finn to me is probably one of the most relatable tween characters I have ever seen depicted in an American animated series. I believe that is a 12-year-old boy. He's naive as hell, and you can basically see him going through puberty with his voice cracking and feelings of romantic jealousy. Plus, he can be very reckless, which can lead to problems. He's also not particularly book smart, but the dude isn't a major idiot. And he has a heroic heart at will, always trying to do what he believes is the right thing, even if it's too complicated and he doesn't know any better. He has a motivated desire to live by heroic code, which sometimes ultimately can lead him to questioning what's wrong and what's right. He also mysteriously appears to be the only human in his homeland, the land of Ooo, as far as we know in this season. Then there's Jake, the shape-shifting dog. He can pretty much squash and stretch into anything and grow in size, which makes up for creative visual gags and stunts made into each episode. Him and Jake are like brotherly knights, as the two grew up together, considering that when Finn was an abandoned infant, Jake's parents picked him up and raised them as their own. Jake is about 12 years old as well, but 28 in dog years, and lives with Finn in this largely surreal treehouse. He's obviously like a big brother type towards Finn, occasionally lecturing him and trying to cheer him up, but he's also very laid back, and sometimes even irresponsible. I wouldn't say Jake is necessarily wiser than Finn, nor would I even say Finn is wiser than Jake, despite their maturity difference. They're just both more wise on different subjects. Finn's entire goal is to become a great adventurer, whereas Jake has different hobbies and is willing to help Finn out using his shape-shifting abilities. Regardless, their friendship and loyalty is inseparable. Next, there's Princess Bubblegum, ruler of the Candy Kingdom and all of its candy people. She's probably the most intelligent and mature person on the entire planet, as she has an extreme fascination with science. As far as we know in this season, she's around 18 years old. Finn has a huge crush on her, even though he's in denial out of embarrassment. However, it's pretty obvious she's not interested, and that she's way too old for him. Even though she's more mature than everyone else, she still sometimes shows off her juvenile and more silly sense of humor, just like Finn and Jake. One of the antagonists in the show is the Ice King. He's pretty much a loser. He's a really awkward creep who likes to simp and kidnap princesses so he can forcefully marry one of them. His name also pretty much speaks for itself. He's the Ice King, he has ice powers and lives in the Ice Kingdom. He can also bring snow to life with his magic. I wonder why he just doesn't create a princess himself that way. Anyway, if it sounds like I'm making this character up to be awful, that's because he is. Not awful as a character, I mean he's intentionally supposed to be bad. Like I said, he's the antagonist. He's also supposed to be a lonely creep who obsesses over a woman. I feel like Twitter wouldn't like this show if they watched it today. It's kinda supposed to be sad, and Finn and Jake beat the Ice King up for these shenanigans. It is kinda funny how crazy and blissfully unaware he is of social situations, though. Like, that's kind of the whole shtick of his comedic angle. And yes, I know there is a lot more to this character in the later seasons that make his actions and who he is as a person more significant. I'm just discussing the portrayal of him in the first season specifically right now. Another key character introduced later in the first season is Marceline the Vampire Queen. She's presented as a very mischievous, intimidating, yet sometimes laid-back woman. Her fun-going nature can come with a case of mischief. There are also some common side characters in the season, such as Lumpy Space Princess, a really bratty drama queen who acts like a stereotypical teenage girl, though the hilarious irony comes from the fact that she's voiced by the creator. BMO, a cute toddler-like talking video game system that Finn and Jake live with, and Lady Rainicorn, a rainbow unicorn who can stretch, fly, and shoot colors out of her horn. She's also Jake's girlfriend, who Jake spends a lot of time with when he's not with Finn. As for the show's environments, it pretty much blends into whatever it wants to, which makes sense since the show was heavily inspired by Dungeons & Dragons. The Candy Kingdom is a great concept. I love all the different candies this show gave life to, having a variety of different sweets, including these large gumball machine guardians. The show's population is overall pretty much miscellaneous. There's animals, wizards, monsters, made-up creatures, unspecified humanoids, ghost, plant life, house people, the magic man who turns Finn into a foot just to be an asshole. What the fuck? The show's weird. Another environment I like in the series is Finn and Jake's treehouse. It has a large, dreamlike exterior with such a fun, relaxed mess of an interior. What the fuck is that? Is that a naked lady? Yeah, that's another thing we gotta talk about. I know that with every animated show I review, I like to discuss the adult humor sprinkled within them, but in this case, I'm gonna be blatantly honest. Adventure Time isn't really a kid's show. If I have kids, I'm letting them watch this shit for sure, and I already have my nieces watching it, and it was mostly targeted towards kids up until its later years, but there's kind of a reason why that parental guidance label is up there. Keep in mind, The Simpsons is also rated PG. There's not really any swearing in the show, but I can't deny that while watching this series, I kind of learned some new language that I probably wasn't old enough to truly understand at the time. The word mating is brought up a lot, usually in unwanted circumstances. I remember Marceline had an old man refer to her as Mistress, who she was bossing around, and there's this scene where this heart guy gives Lumpy Space Princess a best friend massage, and emphasizes how it's completely consensual. There's also some funny visual gags involving boobs. Also, the word sexy is used, which isn't the first time I heard a cartoon say it. I remember shockingly the Fairly OddParents got away with it occasionally when Wandissimo would appear for some reason. The comedy can be pretty damn dark as well. A character named Tree Trunks is introduced in the season, who's an oblivious elephant creature looking for something called the Crystal Gem Apple, so she can bake it for her homemade apple pies, and at the end of the episode, when she finally takes a bite out of it, she blows the fuck up, and you can hear this eerie echoed voice playing in the background. That's how the episode ends. That heart guy I brought up ended up being the Ice King's heart, and before Finn and Jake realized that fact, they beat him up, and afterwards you can see the Ice King practically on the verge of death, trying to get his heart back in him. There's an episode where Finn and Jake accidentally take an animal away from its natural habitat, which causes it to get sick and nearly die as well, and it becomes more complicated when the mother initially rejects them trying to offer the creature back. Oh my god. The series doesn't hold back either. There's some pretty violent and scary imagery throughout the show. But you know what? Good on Cartoon Network. A lot of kids, such as myself, watch this show at a young age, and honestly, I commend them for that. I've stated before in my rant about the rating system that I don't really respect how animation currently kind of talks down to children sometimes. And I don't think you should isolate kids from reality with certain themes like this. At least not older children, I mean. The show should definitely remain PG. Times have certainly changed, however. Outside of holiday specials, the last time the series reran on Cartoon Network, it wasn't even airing on the main block itself. It aired on Adult Swim. And Cartoon Network today currently isn't the same Cartoon Network it was back then. Like I mentioned, they were offered creative control. I think the executives even recommended its creators to take things further than typically shown in children's entertainment. God, I really miss this era. I sometimes get comments from people rolling their eyes at the fact that I don't think many American animated shows are taking risks these days. And guys, this is kind of what I mean. Cartoon Network today just airs stuff like Total Dramarama and Thomas and Friends. Outside of its mature humor, though, the show can be very surreal and playfully entertaining. Normally, I'm not a massive fan of juvenile humor. I don't particularly find potty humor funny at all, but rather childish. But for some reason, Adventure Time has, like, the best fart jokes. They're not overly done and annoying like in shows like Sanjay and Craig, but rather brought up casually and naturally for a short amount of time during unexpected moments, which is what makes it funny. This sounds like how I'd talk to my friends while hanging out and goofing off. I was also worried that looking back on this show, I would see my RAR XD symbol days, since the show has that sort of vibe and was popular amongst teenagers on the internet who were into that sort of thing. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, and I am not shitting on these shows, I love the hell out of them and still think they're absolutely amazing. But whenever I watch Gravity Falls or Star vs. the Forces of Evil and their randomness, cat, rainbows, dialogue, and comedy, I just get instantly reminded of the time these shows were on, and it becomes a little bit distracting. Adventure Time, on the other hand, for some reason, I don't. I still think this season's humor really holds up to this day. There's no overly blatant references to pop culture and internet culture or anything, so the series doesn't feel dated, and it kind of fully establishes that it lives in its own world. And again, everything these characters say comes across as very casual, even with its modern teenage dialect. I guess what helps is that they didn't put Finn in some high school with a bunch of teenage show cliches like popularity or having a stereotypical school bully, which a lot of cartoons were doing before this show. The dude acts like an actual kid his age. Ultimately, I love Adventure Time. I agree with many of its fans and do think it's one of the greatest cartoons ever made. I love its characters, I love its jokes, I love its art direction, oh, and I love its music. This show's background chiptune tracks really hit, and the first season is almost flawless to me. There's hardly anything negative I have to say about it. Is it for everyone? Probably not. If you're a fan of more traditional cartoons or aren't a fan of surreal humor, this isn't really for you. But as for me, it represents my generation and the era I grew up in. No, I'm not even kidding. I actually have a pretty damn close connection with this show. I've met some of the voice cast and writers at conventions and consistently watched the series to its end. I have a shit ton of comics too. Also, recently my family purchased a Roku for me along with multiple streaming services like Paramount Plus, Disney Plus, and HBO Max. And I have to say, after rewatching a lot of these shows, it gives me a larger appreciation for Cartoon Network than I already had before. I love old Nickelodeon, I really do. I was a huge Nickelodeon fan when I was a child, and I still love those old shows, and Disney has a place in my heart as well. But Cartoon Network was a channel that felt like it was made by people who actually gave a shit about the medium. If you watch the original pitch for Cartoon Network's inception, it was pretty obvious they were fully aware that children weren't the only demographic for their content. Then the channel started making their own original cartoons, and pretty much all of them were great. They experimented with different genres and tried new things. The hours upon hours of promotional material on Cartoon Network was fun and inspiring. The block they created for more adult animation was revolutionary. Toonami probably introduced generations of Western children to anime and created a cultural phenomenon. And shows like Adventure Time and other early 2010 shows that I love to review not only saved the network, but saved the medium. I hate to say it, because again, I loved Nickelodeon and I loved some of Disney Channel. Well, more specifically Toon Disney. I was never really a massive fan of Disney's live-action stuff, to be honest. But Cartoon Network probably was the most superior children's network during its time, and Adventure Time is part of that medallion. So yeah, I agree. Adventure Time saved cartoons. Boy, I'm sure glad we're out of that dark era, though. I wonder what America is up to nowadays. Oh yeah, that's right. Total Dramarama and Thomas are huge now. And Teen Titans Go is still running. Well, at least they're not trying to make live-action shows. Ah, shit. Why do I have the sudden urge to watch Evangelion?